Welcome back to the Alexander Schmidt podcast, episode 59, Contemplative Conversation 14. We're back with Mr. Wes Schantz. Wes Schantz, how are you?
Good. Good to be back.
Good to have you back, even though we just had about a 27-minute conversation just before we got on air here, where I think we pretty much figured out the nature of the universe and the cosmos together. We'll have to see whether we can piece it all back together here.
Well, that's every conversation, though, right? I mean, that's nothing new.
That's interesting. That's funny. You remind me of the Timaeus and the idea at the beginning that every conversation is a likely account, as if whenever we converse with each other, whenever we dialogue with each other, we're trying to construct a bridge between reality and our own maps of it, or that we are trying to maybe alter the map to fit reality even better by our shared experience and logos or reasoning. And not so much looking at the words we use, so much as trying to use the most appropriate words in order to figure out what it is that we are expressing to each other. Because, of course, in condensing our experiences down into an account, into a story, the words are not primary, but rather the condensed experience is. And so I think that's why sometimes it's important not to get so much caught up on the words that we're speaking to each other, because of course we're clunkily using them if we're speaking honestly, right? Because as we speak to each other, and this is another Platonic distinction, we speak as friends. And so we give each other the benefit of the doubt. And so even if I use the wrong word, or I don't say something right the first time, or it takes me 5 times to say it right, and I lose my train of thought, which I often do when I'm speaking to you, you don't treat me antagonistically simply because I lose my train of thought and, I'm mentally limited in that way, or because I use a specific word that has differing connotations and you've chosen to fix on, say, the negative connotations of those words, and thus the negative connotations of people who use those words. And I say connotations rather than denotations, because I don't mean like, say, express hate speech, right? There are certainly things you can say to people and words you can use, which are fairly well defined, that will upset most good company and probably lots of bad company as well. But
even if you're using something that could have a double entendre, or you make some kind of slip or whatever, it's that sort of thing, I think, is also a sign that we're engaged in a kind of, I think we were talking about this before, we're practicing, we're training, and so making mistakes is, I guess, in some way a sign of growth. So
that's right. And Peterson, Jordan B. Peterson, who I had the chance to see last night in Nashville, which was a very interesting experience, though not as interesting as I thought it might be, which I thought itself was very interesting, because I was glad to be seeing somebody I respect who has directed me towards so many excellent primary sources, several of which I'm reading right at this moment, like A Billion Wicked Thoughts and Religions, Values, and Peak Experiences by Abraham Maslow, as well as The Origins and History of Consciousness by Neumann. These are all big league thinkers from whom Peterson derives much of what he says. And so when I got to see Peterson speak, I had heard much of what he had said because I've read his 12 books, Rules for Life, heard many of his YouTube lectures, and I think almost all of his coursework, all 5 of the maps of meanings that you can find, as well as the personality courses. And I've read Maps of Meaning. And so it was interesting because it's getting to the point now, and I think this seems to be the point, where much of what he says I can think through myself due to the gift of being able to think clearer because of his clarity of thought and the clarity of thought of all the other authors I am reading who are presenting me with all these major empirical findings. And so I'm more and more capable of reasoning myself. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, that seems like the kind of point at which you want to start to do your own research then, right? To also, like, you see like how this process works, and you see some of the existing findings and some of the existing interpretations, right, which are compelling and which open up all these avenues to to go on and do further work. So it's like that's kind of an exciting aspect of it too. It's if it's really that new to you, then going in and trying to do it for yourself, you're bound to make an error or two. But at the same time, if the alternative is to just sort of keep staying within the same circle of existing interpretations, which they sort of lose their charm after a while. So
right. And we were talking about before we got on air, I've been reading just a little bit of Maslow. I actually bought this one book today, this wonderful used bookstore I visit anytime I'm in Nashville. And he talks about the difference between three different perspectives on living, and that there's even biological evidence that one of these perspectives is the best, as well as political, cultural, and familial and personal evidence, as well as psychological. He's a psychologist, of course. And these three ways of looking at the world are regressive, just go backwards, coasting, not putting any effort forward, but getting by, and growth potential. And he says, well, the growth potential mindset, or the growth value mindset, basically what it wants is good health, good teeth, good hair, physical beauty, success, smarts, lack of anxiety, lack of insomnia, lack of pain, all sorts of biologically rooted things. And he also says that, well, this also happens to be the best and the natural way towards which humans progress, though sort of in the same way that humans initially walk poorly, they progress towards forwards with inefficient tools because they have blurry goals. But the more clarity they bring to their goals, the clearer their goals become. Well, the clearer becomes the value of the tools they're using, and the sharper becomes their perspective necessary to sharpen and improve the tools necessary to get towards the goal better. And so Maslow suggests that, well, when you have the growth mindset rather than a regressive or a coasting mindset, that's essentially what you're spending all of your time doing. You're refining your tools and also refining your vision of your goal, and that creates a maximally meaningful existence for you, which you can live essentially from birth to death. And that means that you're constantly living in what Piaget calls the zone of proximal development, the transformative zone, where you are transforming that which is unknown to you into known, like when you're acquiring a skill or learning something, but also transforming yourself and your map of reality by expanding it out as well. So it's like sort of a trinity, right? The act of transformation, that which is being transformed, and that which is being integrated as well into oneself. And so Peterson has often said in his lectures that he thinks that it is in that moment, the zone of proximal development, doing that growth value mindset activity, that meaning kicks in, that the feeling of meaning is rooted in your nervous system. And these two authors, I'm going to butcher their name, Ogi Ogas and Sai Gadam, who are computational neuroscientists from Boston University, who wrote A Billion Wicked Thoughts. Well, they write about the function of the sympathetic nervous system, which is part of the autonomic nervous system, which has more neurons than that which helps us to be under voluntary control. It is the nervous system that deals with like the unconscious functioning of our organs. And so one thing it does is it readies us for fight or flight or for staying or for freezing when we get put in anomalous situations, when we get put in new situations or transgressive situations where we need to act quickly. And so with more sympathetic nervous system activation in those moments, and you might imagine that the feeling of meaning or the area of proximal development, since you are facing the unknown, is like facing something which is like a predator, like a tiger or something, which would result in the same physiological response for you as seeing a physical predator. Well, in those moments, then, that which is a thought or that which is your map becomes rooted in your body by the activation of your sympathetic system. It actually becomes part of you, and it leaves an emotional imprint in you. And if you think about the big experiences in your life, they're generally marked by strong emotion, right? That's how they're so easy to pull up. And those also happen to be the moments that can cause trauma And when the information latent within those memories you refuse to access, though your attention, like the golden snitch, is naturally drawn to it. And so that's a point that Maslow makes about why every human can pursue individuation and say like a free society, because every one of us have meaningful emotion-ridden experiences in our past that we can mine for data about human nature by observing the effect that those experiences had on us.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think that it's very like it's beautiful that you can have those experiences and then share them. And I guess the flip side of that would be that when you are unable to share them, even to articulate them to yourself in some way to process them, then the flip side of that incredible beauty and potential is what we, get sucked into, the talking about trauma, particularly with like children in schools who are sort of unable to access all of the great stuff that you might want to offer to them because they haven't yet, begun to do the necessary work of sort of putting together their own, setting their own individuality in order, right? Like they haven't processed enough of their own experiences to be able to access these vicarious experiences in great books and things. And it's especially a shame that when you get to the point where your job as a teacher is to try to share those things, and perhaps you yourself have not yet developed to the point where you're ready to do so, and so you sort of are unable to appreciate the beauty of a great book, and you see only that it's an old book by an old dead white male, and then you say, well, why are we even bothering with this? Let's just focus on the trauma. This is the sort of thing that I feel like is at the back of a lot of the problems with education, where you sort of like you lose sight of the bigger picture. You focus on these so-called problems, right, or issues in the smallest possible, in like this, but immediate way, right? You deal with these kids every day, and so
right. I think you're right. It's an attempt to squash individuality as a reality and as a concept, because in taking an issue or taking a stand against a group, one suggests that group identity is the most important defining aspect of oneself, and learning about group identity and one specific group identity as the specific task, therefore, of education, which it seems sort of foolish, because it's like, well, that seemed to be the old argument against indoctrination for old U.S. history courses, right? That the whole idea is that you wanted to teach people how to see reality, not necessarily give them propaganda about how great America is. And in fact, if America is a really great place and we actually value freedom, then we should have the freest education ever, right? We should give the most amount of information and guidance to people, but not just. And here's a point that Maslow makes in Religions, Values, and Peak Experiences, when he's talking about a value-free education. When you try to take values out of education and suggest that that's more scientific and that values are the specific domain of religions, well, the fact is that people are less and less religious, and they don't share the same religions anymore in the same way that they might have even 50 years ago. In fact, a Pew statistic taken from last year showed that white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, for the first time in American history, are now under 50%. And so values are part of what education has always been, because education has always been part of creating a citizen in an individualistic society, which means that the person needs to be capable of the free use of the logos, of that which acquires and ingests information and develops a map and pattern of behavior necessary to live in accordance with other people that are recognized as capable of mapping and changing reality in accordance with their maps, other conscious beings. And in fact, I think that is actually the point of the master and education, is to Piaget talks about one becoming a game master, a creator of bounded spaces, which have rules that can bring about the highest level of adaptation from players, which produces, of course, what? The next game master, the genie, the next sort of Dionysian figure. And I would say that is what I would say 100% the point of the show Westworld is, as well as what the point of all games and why we record masterful games and sports and series and stories, because we are attempting not simply to teach about a tradition or body of artifacts that other humans created that does have tremendous value, but we are trying to show the process by which such people became the people they were meant to be and the products that marked their becoming of something. I think that's actually what a dissertation used to have to be, like a declaration into the world, an infusion into reality of one's being as a doctor of one's art, a learned one. I would say that's in fact what we're attempting to do here in our own specific new creative way, that we're not only transforming ourselves, but trying to transform even the method by which information is shared with other people in this new game, in this new environment, in this new world in which we find ourselves occupying.
Right. I like the image of the LUDI Magister. I think that's really like a fruitful metaphor. And I guess the idea of it being a sort of a ritual experience, a rite of passage, right? That does seem, again, to have some inherent, like, you could fail that, right? Like if there's no possibility of not accomplishing it, then it's not a real rite of passage. With that said, you have a structure set up, right, to do everything possible to help that person actually be prepared, and then they do the best that they can. And
that's right. Everybody's given a place on the game board. In America, at least, you're given a social security number. You're given access to healthcare potentially. You're given access to at least habeas corpus and rule of law, and several social services, including education, and also scholarships and grants. And being free, you are free to take whatever the terrain of your existence is within the rule of law, and that's your game, that's your territory, and that's what you can bounce your creativity off of in order to make your specific existence work. So you of course have some controls, which you can call tyrannical, like laws and customs and things like that, which are constantly changing, however, so they're not that tyrannical. And you have, of course, judges interpreting them, which means you do have a living logos at times dealing with these issues, and especially on the Supreme Court and any state Supreme Court. And so what you're free to do is everybody's on the game board. And even though, of course, it can be very difficult and such, nobody keeps one from their full blossoming within the situation they find themselves in. You do not blossom or become a LUDI Magister outside of the situation in which you find yourself. Like your living situation, your 24 hours, where do you live? How do you interact with the people around you? I think this is what Earthbound tries to teach you, the beauty or the game of the mundane, that you are constantly within a rule-bound environment with several physical and social constraints, and also talent constraints and emotional constraints. And you're trying to navigate through that as well as possible to pursue and refine an end that improves not only your life, but the lives of those around you. And that makes you a good person. And Maslow suggested that the top actual value there, the top biological value, is truth. And that goodness comes after, and that beauty comes after that. It's so funny that, like, the Latin maxims from your old chain of schools, Great Hearts, the pulchrum, the not the beatum, that's happy, excuse me, the pulchrum, the verum, and the bellum.
Bonum.
Oh, bonum, excuse me, yes, excuse me, pulchrum, not bellum there. Yeah, of course, very good. The bonum, the bonus, good. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, well, of course they're there, because I mean, as much as like, just as you said, right, he's like taken in this long tradition and then accessed new tools, and the chief thing about that tradition is its own ability to kind of regenerate itself and improve itself along the way, right? And then he sort of applies that to a new domain of psychological research, right? So it's like, yeah, that's a great model to follow.
Yeah, what's interesting about it is it seems to be like the theory of metempsychosis that the Pythagoreans believed in, the sort of Dionysian, Attic, or Attis-like, or Tammuz-like, or Adonis-like, or Jesus-like death and rebirth motif of that, like the whole point is not simply to see the tradition when you look backwards, but to see that which is working through the tradition. I don't necessarily mean in a Hegelian spirit-like way, unless you translate the spirit or Geist as consciousness, logos, and its development in people. And the metempsychosis seems to be that you learn the tradition well enough in order to grasp, boom, what's actually moving in history, what's actually that people are making choices is what you ultimately have to come down to. And in the seeing that, take responsibility for making your own choices. And then, boom, you've accepted individual responsibility. You're free. Your shackles are gone. But now you have to take responsibility for all the evil and good you've done in your kiss out of the garden, because you experience a psychological submergence into the underworld. Because now that you're taking responsibility, after your shackles come off, you immediately get flooded with all the things you've ever done, which you must now take responsibility for. This is the weighing of your heart on the balance against the feather. And do you think anybody ever has won that? No. And so the crocodile comes and eats you. And that's also the dragon of Pinocchio, or the monstro whale, or also the Jonah whale as well. And in that underworld where you are being digested, sort of like the Satan or from Dante's Inferno, you form yourself anew, as the alchemists would say. You go through a sort of transformation, a deconstruction into your particular parts, and then a reconstruction. And that is the transformation of the logos, and that is the point of a value in liberal education, to take the shackles off those people currently living so that they can live in upright, noble, free ways and pursue their own natural growth. And that seems to be as free as you can possibly be, and making the field of play the same for everybody strikes me not as liberating in that way, because each person's individual territory that they have to navigate means that each person has an individual story. So that strikes me as utterly tyrannical. And then it's attempt, like in Philip Pullman's not the Amber Spyglass, but his Dark Materials series, as an attempt to not eviscerate, but slice down the middle of the soul of a human, to slice them apart from their daimon, to slice them apart from their story, to slice them apart from their environment, to say we're all the same. We have to all go through life in the same way, though we're going to say we care about diversity while still suggesting that everything has to be the same. It's like, no, that's tyranny.
Right.
That it is fighting tyranny under, it is leading to tyranny under the guise of fighting tyranny. But yeah, go on.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's sort of the unintended consequences thing again, right? Like the with every good intention, you try to perhaps shield somebody from a what you take to be a bogus canon, or you try to keep them from some kind of a bully or something like that, right? Like so that in so doing, your intentions are good, of course, and the way to, I suppose, evaluate that, as you say, has to be something other than just your own subjective approach or claim about what you think you're doing. If there is actually some slightly more objective fact that you can draw upon to show really the outcome of your decision, and whether that be truth or good or beautiful, whatever you want to call it, right? Like, in some sense, the thing about all of those, the claim he seems to be making there, is that those are things that you can actually measure. You can actually, put on the table, and everyone can see, and you can talk about it. You'll each come at it from your own perspective, naturally, but there is something there that everyone's talking about together, right? So, yeah.
And I think we can put to bed we can put to rest a couple of these concepts. Let's see if we can do this one really quickly. The idea that you should make somebody safe. Well, here you go. In the Adam and Eve story, as well as in the story of the Buddha, as well as in Aladdin, you have these royal princely sort of figures who are protected from the outside, anomalous information, though anomalous information makes its way in to each one of these places. And so what is the problem with trying to protect somebody? When trying to protect somebody from the world, do you ensure that nothing will ever threaten them? No, because you can never, ever ensure that somebody will not be threatened by someone in the world, because they certainly will be, and not the least of which, possibly you. Because as a human, you have access to malevolence, and so they don't even have the power to stand against you, which is perhaps your unconscious motivation for protecting them, as you say. And so, so what should you do instead? Well, since they are going to have to deal with stressful, dangerous situations in their lives almost constantly and in a manifold way, they need to be the sorts of creatures that are capable of adapting and adapting to a situation in which disaster has occurred, and transforming the situation from disaster to acceptable status quo that enables them to pursue growth values again. And so that means that you shouldn't be like throwing them to the wolves. And there's a point Peterson made yesterday, but you should be guiding them into situations that are challenging for them and potentially have an element of danger in them. I would say that's why I think that the Harry Potter books did so well, that at Hogwarts, which is a place that people universally say they would love to go to, you could actually get hurt. You could cause yourself to shoot, your wand could misfire and you could shoot slugs out of your mouth. Your broom could get cursed and you could fall to the ground and break your arm, and then it could be repaired in an incorrect way. I mean, there's a lot of pain that goes into that. And because of that actual pain, and not to mention the fact that their sympathetic nervous systems are aroused and therefore they have emotional situations, or they remember those moments all the clearer because of the emotional valence of them. They I'm totally forgetting my point right now because I went out on so many tangents there, Wes. I'm sorry.
Well, the thing I was thinking about was how not everyone gets to go to Hogwarts, right? Much as you might want to, or think you want to go, you got to get the letter by the owl first of all, which is again something that I guess a lot of people are probably bound to be disappointed by that, right? There's not necessarily, again, inequality in the gifts that a Harry Potter has versus, I don't know, a Hagrid, right? They're both delightful people. They both get to experience the world in sort of profound ways, and then they share those differences, but they're not like of equal stature.
Yeah, and that's something
there's no story if there are.
If they were. I think that's exactly right. And Orson Scott Card, I think, sort of nailed that down when he wrote not only Ender's Game, but the other Ender's something. I forget what the other name of the book was, from a different character's perspective in the same story. And so the thing is that Hagrid and Harry are both part of a profoundly interesting and archetypal story, which means that they're eternal and they get to embody internal roles. And that's something I think we're forgetting is of the utmost meaning to us. It's how we individually choose to take responsibility for an eternal role that gives ultimate meaning to our lives. But you could just as well write that story from Hagrid's perspective, and I think we would be just as enchanted. In fact, I'm sure there's plenty of fan fiction from Hagrid's perspective out there, and maybe we can do some checking on that, because I know you've got that course coming out soon. And I know that I promised all the viewers that I would be doing some lectures, and I haven't yet, but maybe someday maybe we can just do dialogues on all of these books, and we can say that that's our own version of education, and say that that's how we do themes and units and bullet points.
I guess. I mean, or from the Dursleys' perspective, right? Like they're sort of this necessary background for the story to take place, right? You could write a story from that perspective. It would be a dismal story, but you could do that. That's like the extreme, I guess, of banal realism, but you could do that. That's the story you can tell. I mean, yeah, we should by all means talk through more specific texts here going forward. I do want to do a conversation about Earthbound specifically this week sometime.
Okay, that's great, and that's something that I've been a big fan of So this summer seems to be the first summer that we're really kicking it into gear. And perhaps you've done better with summers in the background, but really taking seriously this growth value idea and taking seriously the idea of opportunity costs too, right? Because we as teachers have set ourselves up to where we can functionally use about 2 months at a time to really delve into our work, into our research, and to the products that we bring out to our surrounding community. And so you're trying to write more and more blogs, you're running a course, you're doing more and more podcasting. I'm attempting to do the same. And so we're trying to show up more and more. And in fact, we recently had sort of a final cause, like the most popular podcaster in the world, Joe Rogan, does around 4 or 5 podcasts a week, 3 hours at a time, 3 hours at a time. And so that's a lot of work that he puts into it. And well, that was something we talked about too, that there is no substitute for putting the work into an endeavor if you just think about it in terms of micro transformations every time you practice something and when you're putting attention into it. If you're practicing 8 hours a day and somebody else is practicing 3 hours a day over the span of, say, even just a week, you've already put in 40 hours in a 5-day week, and they've put in 24, and then expand that out times 4, and then times 12 for a year, and then times 3 years, and you've just produced so much more. And that's what a conscious being with conscientiousness or industriousness can do. We can set goals and then pursue them. And it's especially helpful when we have people who are at the top of an industry showing us the amount of work necessary to do this sort of thing, at least on one front, because of course we don't see the back end of it with him and all of that. But at the very least, we know that he's on the mic 15 hours a week and has in fact done 2 in a row before. So 6 hours of conversation, which might seem indulgent and might seem easy to a radio DJ, but seems pretty hard to me, especially if you're thinking the whole time.
Yeah, I've never been a big talker, but on the other hand, thinking about this as a form of education, well, that sort of is interesting at least. And the thought of, I think, well, part of what his program is always like a conversation, right? And so it's not quite the same as just like lecturing for 3 hours. It's harder in some ways and in some ways easier, I suppose. But
I think that's sort of what we're doing. I want to tie that back to the summer notion before we close tonight. We talked about summer activities, and I think that's going to be a recurring theme for us. But one of the marquee summer activities is when your friends come over and you play video games together. But you don't just play video games together, you also play games together, depending on how fun the house is, during the day and during the night. And there are different games for during the day and during the night. And there are even games for when everybody goes to sleep too, ultimate pillow fights. And during the night, of course, capture the flag and like serious hide and seek and stuff out in the yard. And during the day, you probably play a smaller version of the sport you might play with your friend. Like, so I, with my friend between like 7 and 11, his name was Carson, we would play baseball actually in our league. And then we would go back to his house and we'd play baseball in his yard left-handed. And then we'd go play video games and it would be baseball. And so it's like, what are we doing together when we're young friends and we're playing all those games together? Well, we're mutually exploring ourselves and the unknown. And because the other person is so isomorphic and so extremely similar to you at that young age, you share, or at least you're sharing that you are missing so many experiences together and you're almost equally curious. And so you're exploring together, but under very constrained, already created for you sort of ways, right? Games that have been created by other people. But what we're doing here now in our magisterial nature is we're exploring in a game that we're creating as we're playing it.
Right.
It's demiurgic in that way. And so we are giving the likely account of ourselves and the state of our art as we express it. So it's like every word that comes out of our mouth is the state of the art.
The provisional nature of it is, I guess, redeemed by the fact that you couldn't get to the next one without going through this one.
That's right. The logos has to go through it. No truth is ever true forever. No piece of art is of seminal importance. It is just important in that it houses more or less logos that helps to inspire the active use of logos in the next generation of people. That's the big key for education and art, I would say. You got to pass on as much as possible just so you can hit as many people as possible and liberate as many minds as possible, not simply for the vain desire to make something simply unique or something that will immortalize you. That seems to go against the Ecclesiastes maxim of there's nothing new under the sun. It's like, okay, well, that's fine, but there is something that can disappear that all history has led towards the acquisition and improvement and promulgation of, that we can do our part to help with, and it also happens to be the ultimate goal, and and the ultimate goal of the ultimate archetype that you can embody, which is the hero, and it is get the treasure from the dragon, bring it back to the kingdom to restore the dead king, who is you, because you have now become the king through going through the ultimate sort of sacrifice, through going through the symbolic death and rebirth of facing that which could devour you. That could even be your own greed too, in acquiring something of great value, perhaps a devastating criticism of some contemporary scholars in their very much protected ivory towers, talking about how everything's being taken from them. There was this recent Washington Post article that Peterson actually read from yesterday, which was called something atrocious like the case for why we should hate men. And it's like, of all people, a professor of sociology in a university has so little right to say something like that.
But I guess it's the beautiful thing about it, right? Like they get to say that
that's
anyway.
right. That's right.
It's like, that's fine.
Yeah, like one of the least possibly oppressed people, one of the freest possible people, you might say, even having the mouthpiece so that they could write something like that completely unverified by fact. And boom, all of a sudden it reaches tens of thousands of people. And it's like, and using that very freedom that she would fight against. Right. That it is interesting, the absurdity and that especially when I see, like, say, these absurd Christian atheist debates too, where basically the claim gets made that, well, you act as if you're Christian, and, well, saying that something is embodied is not an actual reason. It's like, well, we might want to actually look at some of these things. Aristotle, and I don't want to get into that specific debate right now, but I would like at some point to get into how that debate is often framed and why that's unhelpful. Because a point that Peterson makes is that a lot of the new atheists, like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, as brilliant as they are and as rooted in science as they are, share the same prejudices of all the scientists from the last half century, because they haven't read Carl Jung, who helps to bridge the gap between psychology and science and shows sort of the innermost values that humans have had since even evolutionary time that affect how we perceive reality. And the moment that we see that we perceive reality in a motivated way, then we'll understand that science is motivated too. And in understanding the motivations behind science, we might be able to actually use science in a value-based way. And so instead of, like, say, producing, chemical weapons, we could maybe focus more on, treating cancer, which obviously we're making great strides on. I heard a statistic today that something like juvenile deaths from cancer have gone down from something like 80% to 20% over the last some amount of years, which just seemed like, oh my God, that's incredible. But it's like, we could always be doing more of that. In human suffering seems to be a perennial issue that we will never be done with, and that if everybody worked as hard as possible to deal with that, we probably still wouldn't make as much headway as we could on. So why not? Because, if you have a little of a good thing, why not make more of the good thing and have more of it?
Yeah, right. It's not a thing that by sharing it out, it only grows. It's that sort of thing. Rather.
That's right. Like civilization, like culture, like a surplus in a capitalist society. It's like when your poor people also have smartphones, that means that, at least on an absolute scale, they're no longer poor. They are relatively poor compared to the people within their own society, which can lead to aggression, all sorts of bad conflicts that are related to the dominance hierarchy, which I've recently been researching in A Billion Wicked Thoughts and a couple of articles on, I think, the National Health website. it's interesting. I always thought that Peterson came up with that notion of the dominance hierarchy, but no, it's very much rooted in psychology and biology.
Mm-hmm.
And so that makes perfect sense. And well, so in any case, that's very interesting. So what have we talked about today, Wes? We've talked about play. We've talked about the growth value mindset, the idea of having values in education, and what the value of education should be, and what true diversity or what true diversity can actually be for people, seeming to be their diversity of stories, which they bring their own free choices into. And what else? What else did we cover?
Well, we went on a few tangents that were, I think, relevant, but
We
sort
didn't
of
get
more
to bring up Harry Potter.
specific to some current cultural and sociological phenomena, I suppose. I think we definitely laid out in sort of a vague but at least tentative way what sort of this project looks like, right? Sort of sharing out more of this good stuff that's out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Distilling it down, creating, instead of, this is our attempt at making our home brew, you might say, or this is our own vegetable garden that we have here. And so maybe the taste will be bitter at first, but we'll hone our craft as we continue to make new brews. And well, perhaps it will never be delightful to the taste, but will be salutary in its effect.
I hope so. Yeah.
But we can always add some sugar, as Mary Poppins suggests.
Oh gosh, yeah. Or I think Lucretius, right? He talked several times about putting the honey on the rim of the cup.
Yeah, and we're going to have to do some symbolic investigations. I really want to do the underworld with you and talk about some bees with you too. I continue to be so impressed by your symbolic investigation of the ladders that you did a couple weeks ago, or several weeks ago now, on Anchor. That really just stood out to me. I thought that was tremendous scholarship on your part, even though you were saying you were just playing around and then it might seem inappropriate to some people, amplifying that image like that. But what's interesting is that, and I don't mean to go on this tangent too much, but a big reason that Peterson supposes that Carl Jung, his work didn't get popular during his time, was that many of his clients and the people who learned his style of therapy were women who were excluded from the university at that time. And so were very creative individuals, but weren't necessarily going to be scholars. And so that method of amplification, which he would use when doing dream analysis or looking into somebody's feelings in order to look at what images symbolize the feelings in order to see what situation caused those feelings, is an extraordinarily effective way of thinking, and is in fact what I think we call brainstorming, and is called stream of consciousness by some, though I don't agree that James Joyce does it in a natural way like sort of we do, but I think a good lecture or a good conversation follows this direction of amplification, and then maybe some analysis and synthesis and additional amplification, throwing out all these images, something to chew on for people. And I think that method of thinking, as powerful as it is and is rooted in language and symbolic thinking, has been sort of poo-pooed or pushed to the side as like weaker thinking, with this this scholarly desire to write and think analytically, which is of course extraordinarily important, but is only at the most half of the game.
At most. And I mean, I think that's a point that's made really powerfully in a book that I know mostly through Peterson's talking to the guy who wrote it, the Master and His Emissary.
Yes, I saw that at the bookstore today, and I wanted to buy it again.
Oh. Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, I don't know quite where he stands in the sort of the ranks of eminent scientists and whatnot, but he's got to be up there. And he basically makes that point with a lot of data to back it up, that other alternative modes, including more synthetic or exploratory ones, are as important, or perhaps at this time in history even more important, to take what's been done by the analytic approach and actually put it into some kind of workable context.
That seems to have been your question of what I was attempting to do with my Iliad lectures early on, and also seems to be exactly, oh no, I'm forgetting the other example. I had for that. That was so wonderful. Oh, no. Oh, it's also what Plato does, especially in the Timaeus, where not only does he reason something out, but he lays out a likely account, sort of a vague account in which you can sort of look at things because, oh, I understand why that works now, Wes. Because just we have a very vague way of perceiving reality around us and representing it while we're walking around visually, in order to think, we need to lay out our sort of vague perceptual structure of how things are as well. So you actually construct your map as you are talking with somebody, because it is sort of tattered and broken in your own head because you can't see its own internal inconsistencies, because for one, it's massive, mostly embodied, and you can't articulate so much of it until you dig down deep. And that's the going into the unconscious, right? Why do I do these things? Why do I feel these things? And when you throw it out in language, you actually see what it is you see, and you actually see what it is you know, and thus you see the boundaries of what you know and can see the next things you don't know, which puts you into the area of proximal development. And so that becomes the game, right? Because you see all these pieces missing from the puzzle, and your immediate inclination in actually seeing this as a conscious being who naturally tends towards growth mentality is, we got to fix this up. We got to fix this up. And you even see this in activities of humans. They buy cars that are fixer-uppers. They buy houses that are fixer-uppers. They date guys like us who are fixer-uppers. And it does. We build things up. We're like the spider.
Yeah.
So not icky. Well, it depends. And well, I'm loving doing this with you, Wes. I'm hoping that we're going to keep doing this more. I know that we did one just 3 days ago, and maybe we can even do some themed weeks coming out here too, or have a certain time, or keep doing different times, and just keep creating different patterns and pursuing different constraints on this project, just to continue to see how we develop and where we develop out, and what this all ends up turning into, because perhaps we're just following the lines of a spiral, as those who believe in fractals in their macrocosmic and microcosmic nature might suggest, like Dante.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Well, until we go deeper, Mr. Schantz, it's been a wonderful conversation.
Appreciate it. I'll talk to you again soon.
Talk to you soon.
The podcast you just heard was recorded with Anchor. If you want to make your own, download the Android or iOS app completely free from anchor.fm/podcast. That's anchor.fm/podcast.